Before we begin tonight, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy this peaceful journeys through Scripture. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Phone face down, volume at a whisper. Let's go in. In the dusty villages of ancient Galilee, where the sun beat down mercilessly on stone and sand, where fishermen cast their nets into the deep waters of the Great Lake, where farmers tended their crops on terraced hillsides, something extraordinary was beginning to happen. Word was spreading, whispers turning into shouts. A man had appeared, not just any man, a teacher, a healer, a worker of wonders that defied every natural law the ancient world had known. His name was Jesus, and the miracles he performed would change the course of human history forever. These were not tricks, not illusions conjured by clever hands or deceptive words. These were signs, divine interventions that demonstrated who this carpenter from Nazareth truly was. Each miracle carried meaning beyond the immediate healing or provision. Each one pointed to a deeper truth. Each one revealed a facet of the glory of God made flesh, dwelling among humanity. The gospel writers documented these signs with careful attention. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John each recorded the miraculous works they witnessed or heard testified about by eyewitnesses. They wrote not merely to catalog wonders, but to inspire belief, to show that the long-awaited Messiah had come, that the promises spoken by prophets hundreds of years before were now being fulfilled in their midst. Matthew, writing primarily to a Jewish audience, emphasized how Jesus fulfilled Old Testament prophecies. He showed the miracles as proof that Jesus was the promised Messiah, the son of David, the one Israel had been waiting for. Mark, whose gospel is the shortest and most action-oriented, presented Jesus as a man of divine power whose deeds spoke louder than words. Luke, the physician and careful historian, included unique healing accounts and emphasized Jesus' compassion for the marginalized, the poor, the outcasts. And John, writing later than the others, carefully selected 7 major signs to demonstrate that Jesus was the divine Son of God. John, the beloved disciple, made this purpose explicit. At the end of his gospel, he wrote, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. The miracles were acts of compassion. They were demonstrations of divine power. They were proclamations of a kingdom breaking into the world. And tonight, as the world grows quiet around you, as darkness settles, and you prepare for rest, we journey through these peaceful yet powerful stories. Stories of water turned to wine, of blind eyes opened, of storms silenced, of the dead raised to life. Let the tension of your day dissolve. Let your breathing slow. Let these ancient accounts wash over you like gentle waves, because in these miracles, we see not only what Jesus did then, but what his presence can do now. In our brokenness, our suffering, our need, he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. The God who turned water to wine can turn our sorrow to joy. The God who opened blind eyes can give us vision for our lives. The God who calmed the storm can speak peace to our troubled hearts. The God who raised the dead can bring new life to every dead and dying place within us. These miracles happened. They were documented. They were witnessed. They transformed lives then, and their meaning continues to transform lives now. So settle in, close your eyes if you haven't already, and let us walk together through the dusty roads of Galilee. Let us stand in the crowds pressing around this remarkable teacher. Let us watch as he speaks and creation itself obeys. Let us witness compassion made visible. Let us see glory revealed. The wedding at Cana, water transformed to wine. The first sign, the inauguration of Jesus' public ministry, not performed in the temple before the religious authorities, not done in the palace before kings, but at a wedding, an ordinary celebration in an ordinary village, a place of joy and community and the simple pleasures of human life. The village was Cana, a small settlement in the region of Galilee. The exact location has been debated by scholars across the centuries. Some identify it with the modern village of Cana, about 4 miles northeast of Nazareth. Others point to Cana, farther north, where archaeological evidence suggests wine production in the 1st century. But the precise location matters less than what happened there. It was the 3rd day, John tells us. 3 days after Jesus had called his first disciples. Philip and Nathanael had just joined the small group of followers. They were young in their faith, still learning who this teacher really was. And Jesus, along with his mother Mary and these disciples, received an invitation to a wedding feast. Weddings in 1st century Jewish culture were elaborate affairs. Not a brief ceremony followed by a reception, but celebrations that could last an entire week. The entire community would be invited. There would be music, dancing, storytelling, and crucially, there would be wine. To run out of wine at a wedding was more than an inconvenience. It was a social disaster, a source of shame that would linger over the family for years in a small village where everyone knew everyone else's business. And that's exactly what happened. Mary, the mother of Jesus, noticed it first. She may have been helping with the preparations, as her awareness of the shortage suggests some involvement with the serving arrangements. Or perhaps she simply had a particular sensitivity to the needs of others, born from years of pondering the mysteries surrounding her son's birth in her heart. She approached Jesus quietly and said simply, "They have no more wine." It was a statement of fact, but also an implied request, a mother's confidence in her son. She knew something the other guests didn't know. She had watched this child grow. She had treasured the words of angels in her heart. She had witnessed his wisdom even at 12 years old, conversing with the teachers in the temple. She believed he could help. Jesus' response might seem strange to modern ears. "Woman," he said, "what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." The word woman was not disrespectful in that culture. It was a formal but respectful way of addressing even one's mother. But Jesus was making a point. His divine mission, his hour, as he called it throughout John's Gospel, was not yet fully arrived. That hour would come later, on a cross, in a garden tomb, in resurrection glory. This was not yet that moment of ultimate revelation. But Mary, in her wisdom, simply turned to the servants and said, "Do whatever he tells you." She trusted. She believed. She knew that even if the full hour of his glory had not yet come, her son could still act. That the compassion and power she had seen glimpses of throughout his life could be revealed to help these people in their need. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, large ones, the kind used for Jewish ceremonial washing. According to the law, Jews would wash their hands before eating, and these jars held the water for such purification rituals. Each jar held 20 to 30 gallons, massive containers. Together, they could hold somewhere between 120 and 180 gallons of water. Jesus looked at the servants. His instructions were simple. "Fill the jars with water," he said. The servants obeyed. They filled those enormous stone jars to the brim. Gallons and gallons of water, drawn from the well, poured in. Water that would normally be used for washing hands and feet and dishes. Ordinary water for an ordinary ritual purpose. Then Jesus gave a second instruction. "Now, draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." The master of the banquet was the chief steward, the one responsible for overseeing the feast, managing the servants, ensuring everything ran smoothly. He would be the one to taste the wine before it was served to the guests. A quality control check, making sure nothing was amiss. The servants drew out some of the contents from those jars, and as the liquid poured into their vessels, something extraordinary had occurred. The water had become wine, not grape juice, not some diluted mixture, but wine, fully fermented, rich, complex. The finest vintage these servants had ever seen. They brought it to the master of the banquet. He tasted it, having no idea where it had come from. The servants knew, of course. They had just filled those jars with plain water, but the steward was oblivious to the miracle that had just taken place. He called the bridegroom over, and what he said next became one of the most memorable lines in the entire story. "Everyone brings out the choice wine first," he said, "and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." It was true. The normal custom was to serve the finest wine at the beginning of the celebration, when people's palates were fresh and could appreciate the quality. Then, as the night wore on and people had drunk their fill, the host would bring out lesser quality wine. No one would notice or care by that point. But this wine, produced from water in an instant by the creative word of Jesus, was the finest anyone had tasted. Not cheaper, not inferior, better than anything that had been served all evening. An abundance of the highest quality. Somewhere between 120 and 180 gallons of premium wine where before there had been only water. The symbolism was rich. The water in those stone jars represented the old covenant, the rituals, the ceremonial washings, the external purity laws that could cleanse the outside but never truly cleanse the heart. Jesus, the Messiah, had come to bring something new, something better. The wine represented the new covenant, the joy and abundance of God's kingdom, the spiritual transformation that goes deeper than any ritual washing ever could. The water of the old way became the wine of the new. The 6 jars, perhaps representing incompleteness in Jewish numerology, where 7 signified perfection and completion, pointed to the 7th day, the day of rest and fulfillment, which Jesus himself would bring. The transformation from water to wine foreshadowed the transformation Jesus would bring to every life he touched, from emptiness to fullness, from ritual to relationship, from law to grace, from the old covenant written on stone to the new covenant written on hearts. Throughout the Old Testament, wine had been a symbol of God's blessing and abundance. The prophet spoke of the Messianic age as a time when the wine would flow freely, when joy would be restored, when God would host a great banquet for his people. Now, at this wedding in Cana, that messianic banquet was beginning. The abundance of wine, the highest quality wine, pointed forward to the abundance of grace and truth that had come through Jesus Christ. John records the impact of this first sign. Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. The disciples saw. They witnessed this quiet miracle, hidden even from most of the wedding guests. Only the servants, Mary, the disciples, and perhaps the master of the banquet had any idea what had truly happened. But for those who saw, it was a revelation. This was no ordinary teacher. This was someone with power over the very elements of creation. Someone who could transform substances at the molecular level with just a word. Their belief in him deepened. They began to understand, however dimly at that early stage, that they were following someone extraordinary, someone whose glory, though veiled in human flesh, was beginning to shine through. This first miracle set the tone for all that would follow. Jesus cared about ordinary human needs. A wedding running out of wine might not seem as important as healing a fatal disease or raising someone from death. But to Jesus, no human need was too small. He cared about joy, about celebration, about preventing shame, about the simple pleasures of life shared in community, and he had the power to provide abundantly the finest quality, more than enough. Not a few bottles to get them through the evening, but 150 gallons or more of the best wine anyone had ever tasted. This was the God who would later multiply 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed 5,000 people with 12 baskets left over. This was the God of abundance, not scarcity. The God who gives good gifts. The God whose transforming power can take the ordinary and make it extraordinary. The wedding at Cana was a foreshadowing. Jesus, the bridegroom, had come to claim his bride, the church. The wedding feast would continue throughout his ministry as he gathered followers. And one day, in the age to come, there would be a final wedding supper, the marriage supper of the Lamb, where all the redeemed would gather, where the joy would be complete, where the wine would flow forever. But it started here, in a small village, at an ordinary wedding, with a quiet miracle that only a handful of people even knew had occurred. The glory was revealed, the disciples believed, and Jesus' public ministry had begun. Healing the sick, broken bodies made whole. From Cana, Jesus moved throughout the region of Galilee, and everywhere he went, he brought healing, not to some, not to a select few, but to all who came to him in faith, the sick, the suffering, those racked with pain, those who had exhausted every human remedy and found no relief. They came, and Jesus healed. One of the earliest recorded healings involved a Roman centurion whose servant was gravely ill. The account appears in both Matthew and Luke, telling of this remarkable encounter. Jesus had entered the town of Capernaum, a fishing village on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee that became something of a home base for his Galilean ministry. A centurion approached him, though in Luke's account he sent Jewish elders to make the request on his behalf. This was a Roman military officer, a Gentile, someone who commanded 100 soldiers. These men were the backbone of the Roman legion, disciplined, respected, but also representatives of the occupying power that controlled Israel. The Jewish people had complicated feelings about Romans. They were the overlords, the oppressors, the ones who collected taxes and enforced foreign laws. But This particular centurion was different. Luke records that the Jewish elders vouched for him, saying he loved the Jewish nation and had even built their synagogue. He was a man who, despite his position in the Roman military, had shown kindness and generosity to the people he was stationed among, and now he sought Jesus in desperate need. His servant was sick. Matthew describes him as paralyzed and suffering terribly. In that culture, servants were often treated as property, disposable, easily replaced. But this centurion cared deeply for his servant, enough to seek out this Jewish teacher, enough to humble himself and ask for help. In Matthew's account, Jesus responded immediately, "I will go and heal him." But the centurion's reply, whether delivered directly or through messengers, as Luke suggests, has echoed through 2,000 years of Christian faith as one of the most profound expressions of trust in Jesus' power. The essence of his message was clear. "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." The centurion understood authority. He knew the power of a command from someone who has the right to give it. He recognized in Jesus an authority that transcended the merely human, an authority over sickness itself, an authority so complete that physical presence wasn't even necessary. A word would be enough, a command spoken from a distance, and the servant would be healed. Jesus was astonished. Matthew records that he said to those following him, "Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith." Here was a Gentile, a Roman soldier, displaying faith that exceeded what Jesus had seen among his own people. It was a preview of what was to come, the gospel spreading beyond Israel, the kingdom of God opening to all nations, faith, not ethnicity or religious pedigree, being the key that unlocks God's power. Jesus spoke to the centurion, "Go, let it be done just as you believed it would." And in that same hour, Matthew tells us the servant was healed. Miles away, lying on his bed, racked with pain and paralysis, the servant suddenly felt strength return to his limbs. The pain evaporated. The paralysis released. He stood. He moved. He was whole, not gradually, not through a slow recovery, but instantly, completely. The centurion returned home to find his servant restored. The miracle had happened exactly as Jesus had said it would. Faith had reached across the distance, and divine power had responded. Another healing took place in Capernaum, this time in the home of Simon Peter. Jesus had been teaching in the synagogue on the Sabbath. He had cast out an evil spirit from a man who was possessed. The news spread quickly through the small town, and when the Sabbath ended at sunset, crowds began gathering, bringing their sick, their demon-possessed, all who needed healing. But before the evening crowds came, Jesus went to Peter's house, and there he found Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. Fever might not sound serious to modern ears accustomed to antibiotics and fever-reducing medications. But in the ancient world, fever was often a death sentence. Infections could rage unchecked. People died from what we would now consider treatable illnesses. Mark's gospel record that they told Jesus about her immediately. He went to her bedside. He took her hand. He helped her up. And the fever left her, just like that. No gradual cooling of her temperature over hours or days. No lingering weakness. The fever left her completely, and she immediately began serving them, hosting them in her home. The healing was so thorough, so complete, that she had the strength to resume her normal activities right away. Then, as sunset marked the end of the Sabbath, the real flood of sick people began. The whole town gathered at the door, Mark writes. Everyone who had anyone sick brought them to Jesus. Those with various diseases, those tormented by demons. He healed many, he cast out evil spirits, and he did it with gentleness and authority. Perhaps the most dramatic healing story involved a paralytic man and his 4 friends. Jesus was teaching in a house in Capernaum. Word had spread that he was there, and the crowd was so large that there was no room left, not even outside the door. People packed in, desperate to hear his teaching, hoping to witness a miracle. 4 men arrived carrying their friend on a mat. He was paralyzed, unable to walk, unable to move his legs, dependent on others for everything. These 4 friends were determined to get him to Jesus. They believed Jesus could heal him. But when they arrived, they couldn't get anywhere near the door. The crowd was too thick, too dense. No one was moving. Most people would have given up. Come back another day, try it again when the crowd was smaller. But these 4 men were not most people. They had faith, they had determination, and they had an idea. They went up onto the roof of the house. In that culture, roofs were flat and accessible, used as outdoor living space. Made of wooden beams covered with branches and packed mud, these 4 men began to dig, to pull apart the roof, to create an opening directly above where Jesus was teaching. Picture the scene. Jesus in the middle of the house, surrounded by listeners. Religious leaders present, watching critically. And suddenly, bits of mud and straw begin falling from the ceiling. People look up. A hole is appearing, growing larger, and then, slowly, carefully, a mat is lowered through the opening. On the mat lies a paralyzed man, eyes wide, descending on ropes held by his 4 friends above. The audacity of it, the disruption, the mess, the dirt falling on everyone below, but also the faith, the unwavering belief that if they could just get their friend in front of Jesus, everything would be different. They didn't let the crowd stop them, didn't let the closed door discourage them, didn't let social convention or concern about property damage hold them back. They saw an obstacle and found a way around it, or rather, through it. Jesus looked at the man on the mat, but more than that, he saw the faith of the 4 friends who had gone to such extraordinary lengths. The text says explicitly, when Jesus saw their faith, not just the paralyzed man's faith, but the faith of his friends, faith that believed barriers could be broken through, faith that took extraordinary action, faith that refused to be deterred by crowds or convention or closed doors. This is the kind of faith that moves Jesus to act, not passive hope, but active determination, not wishful thinking, but bold action. And Jesus spoke, but not the words everyone expected. He didn't immediately say, "Get up and walk." He said something far more controversial. "Son, your sins are forgiven." The religious teachers sitting there were outraged. They thought to themselves, "Why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" They were right about one thing. Only God can forgive sins. Sin is ultimately an offense against God, an act of rebellion against Him, a breaking of His law, a violation of His character. Only the one who has been sinned against can truly forgive, and that's God. But what the religious leaders failed to grasp was exactly who was standing in front of them. Jesus wasn't a mere man claiming to do what only God could do. He was God in human flesh, exercising the divine prerogative of forgiveness. Jesus knew what they were thinking. He always did. "Why are you thinking these things?" he asked. Which is easier, to say to this paralyzed man, "Your sins are forgiven," or to say, "Get up, take your mat, and walk"? It was a brilliant question. Speaking words of forgiveness is easy in one sense. There's no immediate way to verify whether it's happened. But telling a paralyzed man to walk? That's immediately verifiable. Either he walks or he doesn't. Either Jesus has the power to back up his words or he doesn't. "But I want you to know," Jesus continued, "that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." He turned to the paralyzed man. "I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home." And the man did. Immediately. The paralysis that had held him captive perhaps for years released. Strength flooded into limbs that had been useless. Muscles responded. Nerves fired. He stood up, picked up the mat he had been lying on moments before, and walked out in full view of everyone. The crowd was amazed. They praised God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." The 4 friends on the roof watched their buddy walk out on his own 2 feet. The mess they'd made of the roof didn't matter. The social awkwardness didn't matter. The skepticism of the religious leaders didn't matter. Their friend could walk. And more than that, Jesus had spoken forgiveness over him. The deepest healing, the healing of his relationship with God, had occurred alongside the physical healing. Jesus went with him immediately. But as they made their way through the pressing crowd, something remarkable happened. A woman who had been suffering from bleeding for 12 years was there. She had spent all her money on doctors, tried every remedy. Nothing worked. She only got worse. According to the law, her condition made her ceremonially unclean. She couldn't worship in the temple, couldn't participate in community life fully. Every touch made others unclean. But she had heard about Jesus, and she thought to herself, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Such faith, such humble expectation, not asking for a dramatic public healing, not even asking to speak to him directly, just believing that contact with even his garment would be enough. She came up behind him in the crowd, reached out, touched the fringe of his cloak, and immediately she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. 12 years of bleeding stopped in an instant. Jesus knew power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples were baffled. "You see the people crowding against you," they said, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking, and the woman, realizing she couldn't remain hidden, came forward, trembling. She fell at his feet, told him the whole truth, confessed what she had done. Jesus' response was gentle, affirming. "Daughter," he said, calling her into relationship, "your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." She had been healed the moment she touched him, but Jesus wanted everyone to know it wasn't some magical power in his clothes. It was her faith, her trust, her belief that he could heal. That's what mattered. This delay, however brief, would prove significant. While Jesus was still speaking to the woman, messengers arrived from Jairus' house with devastating news. At the pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem, there lay a man who had been invalid for 38 years. 38 years? More than 3 decades of being unable to walk, of watching others move freely while he remained stuck, of depending on others for every need. The pool had a reputation for healing. The people who gathered there believed that at certain times the water would be stirred, and the first person and afterward would be healed. Some manuscripts mention an angel stirring the water, though this detail appears to have been added later by scribes trying to explain the belief. Regardless of what actually caused the stirring, what matters is that this man had been lying there for decades, hoping, waiting, never quite making it into the water in time. Jesus came to the pool on the Sabbath. He saw the man lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time. Then Jesus asked him a question that might seem obvious. Do you want to get well? But it wasn't obvious at all. After 38 years, this man's identity was wrapped up in being an invalid. It was all he'd known for most of his adult life. Getting well would mean a complete transformation of his existence, new responsibilities, a different place in society, loss of whatever small securities his invalid status provided. The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he explained his situation. Sir, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Jesus didn't offer to help him into the pool. He didn't wait for the water to be stirred. He simply spoke, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." And at once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. After 38 years of paralysis, he walked on the command of Jesus. No gradual physical therapy, no lengthy recovery, instant, complete healing. The religious leaders were furious because it was the Sabbath, and they accused the healed man of breaking the Sabbath law by carrying his mat. They seemed more concerned about their rules than about the fact that a man who had been unable to walk for nearly 4 decades could now walk. They had completely missed the point, missed the miracle, missed the presence of the Messiah in their midst. These healing stories repeat throughout the Gospels. Jesus healing the sick brought to him, sometimes with dramatic public displays, sometimes quietly, always with compassion, always with power. The lame walked, the deaf heard, the mute spoke, the sick were cured. Diseases that had no remedy in the ancient world vanished at his word. He healed because he cared, because he had compassion on suffering humanity, because he could, and because each healing was a sign pointing to a deeper truth. He came to heal not just bodies, but souls, not just to cure disease, but to cure the ultimate sickness, sin and death. Every physical healing was a preview of the complete healing he would bring through his death and resurrection. Opening blind eyes, light, breaking into darkness. Of all the healing miracles Jesus performed, perhaps none carried more theological weight than healing the blind. In the Hebrew Scriptures, there is no recorded instance of a blind person being healed, not through prophets, not through priests. Blindness was considered beyond human help, beyond even miraculous intervention, it seemed. The prophets had foretold that when the Messiah came, the blind would see. Isaiah wrote, "Then will the eyes of the blind be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped." It was a messianic sign, a marker of the one who would come to bring light into the world's darkness. And Jesus did exactly that, multiple times in different ways. He opened blind eyes and in doing so proclaimed his identity as the light of the world. The longest healing narrative in all the Gospels is the story of the man born blind in John chapter 9. It's given an entire chapter, which tells us something about its significance. This wasn't just another healing. It was a theological battleground, a place where light and darkness, belief and unbelief, spiritual sight and spiritual blindness all came into sharp focus. Jesus was walking along when he and his disciples saw a man who had been blind from birth, never seen a sunrise, never seen his mother's face, never seen the colors of flowers or the sparkle of water, born into darkness and living there still. The disciples asked Jesus a question that revealed their theological assumptions. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? In their worldview, suffering was always tied to sin. If someone was sick or disabled, it must be because of some moral failing, either their own sin or the sin of their parents. It was a neat, tidy theology that explained suffering, but offered no comfort and only increased shame. Jesus rejected their assumption entirely. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, he said, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Not every suffering is a punishment for sin. Sometimes suffering exists so that God's power and glory can be revealed in healing it. This man's blindness had a purpose. Though not the one the disciples imagined, it was setting the stage for a demonstration of divine power. Jesus continued, "As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Then he did something unusual. He spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and put it on the blind man's eyes. The method varied from healing to healing. Sometimes Jesus touched people. Sometimes he spoke from a distance. Sometimes he used physical means like this mud. The point wasn't the method. The point was the power. "Go," Jesus told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." The pool of Siloam was a significant location in Jerusalem. During the Feast of Tabernacles, priests would draw water from this pool and pour it on the altar, symbolizing God's provision of life-giving water. Jesus himself had stood at that feast and declared, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them." The blind man went, made his way to the pool, felt for the edge, splashed the water on his mud-covered eyes, washed, and the darkness that had been his entire existence vanished. Light flooded in, shapes, colors, the stunning, overwhelming, beautiful world he had never seen before. He could see. He went home seeing, and immediately the questions began. His neighbors were confused. "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" some asked. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But the man himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" They asked. He told them, the man called Jesus. The mud, the pool, the washing, the seeing. "Where is this man?" they asked. "I don't know," he replied. They brought him to the Pharisees. And here's where the miracle became a controversy. It was the Sabbath when Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes. In the Pharisees' interpretation of Sabbath law, making mud was work. Healing was work. Jesus had broken the Sabbath, therefore he couldn't be from God. Some Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others asked, "How can a sinner perform such signs?" They were divided. split right down the middle. The evidence of the miracle confronted their theology. Their rules said Jesus was a sinner because he worked on the Sabbath. But the miracle said he was from God because only God could open blind eyes. They couldn't reconcile these two facts. So they turned to the blind man, hoping perhaps to find some flaw in his testimony. "What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened." The man replied simply, honestly, "He is a prophet." But the religious leaders still didn't believe he had been blind. Perhaps they thought it was all a clever trick, a con, someone pretending to be blind who could actually see all along. So they called his parents, thinking surely they would expose the deception. "Is this your son? Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see?" The parents were terrified. Anyone who acknowledged Jesus as Messiah would be put out of the synagogue, excommunicated, cut off from the religious and social life of the community. It was a severe threat. So they answered carefully, "We know he is our son, and we know he was born blind. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age, he will speak for himself." So they called the man again. "Give glory to God by telling the truth," they said. "We know this man is a sinner." His answer has become one of the great testimonies of faith in Scripture. Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. They kept interrogating him. "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" The man grew frustrated. "I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" That sent them into a rage. "You are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." The formerly blind man gave them a theology lesson. Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. His logic was impeccable. His argument was sound. But the Pharisees weren't interested in logic or truth. They were invested in their position, their power, their interpretation. "You were steeped in sin at birth," they sneered. "How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out. Jesus heard that they had expelled him from the synagogue. He found the man and asked, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." The man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. His eyes had been opened twice that day. First, physically, he received sight. Second, spiritually. He recognized Jesus for who he truly was, the Son of Man, the Messiah, worthy of worship. Jesus made a statement that cut to the heart of the story. "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." The Pharisees asked sarcastically, "What? Are we blind too?" Jesus replied, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin, but now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains." The man born blind, physically blind all his life, now saw clearly, both with his eyes and with his soul. The Pharisees, who claimed to see spiritually, who were the religious experts, were actually blind. They couldn't see who Jesus was even when his glory was right in front of them. They chose their traditions, their positions, their pride over truth. Jesus healed other blind people too. At Bethsaida, they brought him a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. Jesus took him by the hand and led him outside the village. He put spit on the man's eyes and placed his hands on him. "Do you see anything?" Jesus asked. The man looked up. "I see people," he said. "They look like trees walking around." It was partial sight, blurry, unclear. So Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes again. This time, his sight was completely restored. He saw everything clearly. This two-stage healing has led to various interpretations. Some scholars suggest it was a teaching moment, showing that spiritual sight also sometimes comes gradually. We see things partially at first, dimly, then more clearly, as we continue to seek. Whatever the reason for the two-stage process, the result was complete healing and perfect vision. As Jesus was leaving Jericho with his disciples in a large crowd, blind beggars were sitting by the roadside. Matthew's gospel mentions two blind men, while Mark and Luke focus on one named Bartimaeus. When they heard that Jesus was passing by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet. But they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." Jesus stopped. "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately, they received their sight and followed him. Mark's gospel gives us more detail about Bartimaeus specifically. He was well known in Jericho as a beggar, sitting by the roadside in his darkness, depending on the charity of passers-by to survive. When he heard it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." He used that title, Son of David. He recognized Jesus as the Messiah, the one descended from King David, the one promised by the prophets. This blind beggar had more spiritual insight than many who could see. People tried to silence him, told him to be quiet, but he shouted even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped, called him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." Bartimaeus threw aside his cloak, jumped to his feet, came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked. "Rabbi, I want to see." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has healed you." Immediately Bartimaeus received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Faith, again and again, it was faith that Jesus highlighted. The physical healing was important, life-changing, but the faith that preceded and accompanied the healing was even more significant. Faith that believed Jesus could do what seemed impossible. Faith that refused to be silenced. Faith that threw aside everything else to come to him. Faith that, once sight was received, led to following him. Every healing of blindness was a sign the light of the world had come, the one who could illuminate darkness, who could open eyes that had never seen, who could give sight to those born without it. And not just physical sight, but spiritual sight. The ability to see who he was, to recognize truth, to walk in light rather than darkness. The blind men Jesus healed became living demonstrations of his identity, walking, seeing proofs that the Messiah had come, that the promises of Isaiah were being fulfilled, that the kingdom of God had broken into the world, and that this kingdom was available not just to the religiously trained, not just to the learned Pharisees, but to anyone who would cry out in faith, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Healing lepers, touching the untouchable. In the ancient world, few conditions were more feared than leprosy. The term encompassed various skin diseases, but all were lumped together under this dreaded designation, and leprosy meant more than physical suffering. It meant social death. According to the law of Moses, anyone with a skin disease had to live apart from the community. They couldn't come to the temple, couldn't worship with others, couldn't live with their families. They had to tear their clothes, leave their hair unkempt, cover the lower part of their face, and cry out, "Unclean, unclean," whenever anyone approached. It was isolation enforced by religious law, quarantine taken to the extreme. The person with leprosy became a walking warning sign, avoided, feared, alone, and there was no cure. Leprosy was considered incurable. The book of Leviticus included an entire chapter, chapter 14, detailing the rituals required if someone were healed of leprosy, offerings to be made, cleansing ceremonies to perform. It was all written down. But after centuries, the rabbis noticed something. Those rituals had never been used, not once. No Jewish person had ever been healed of leprosy. The Leviticus 14 rituals were theoretical, academic, waiting for a miracle that had never come. This led the rabbis to conclude that healing a Jewish person of leprosy would be a messianic miracle, a sign that could only be performed by the Messiah himself. When the Messiah came, he would heal lepers. It would be one of the ways to recognize him. So when Jesus healed lepers, he wasn't just showing compassion, he was making a claim, demonstrating his messianic identity, fulfilling prophecy, doing what only the promised one could do. A man with leprosy came to Jesus. In some gospel accounts, he fell on his face before Jesus. In others, he knelt. But the posture was the same. Humility, desperation. He had nothing to lose, already cut off from everything, already considered as good as dead. What did he have to fear from approaching this teacher? He said to Jesus, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Notice the phrasing, not "if you are able." He didn't doubt Jesus' power. He questioned only his willingness. Would Jesus want to heal him? Would he care enough about an outcast and unclean man to act? Jesus' response is one of the most touching moments in the Gospels. He reached out his hand, and he touched the man. Pause and consider that. No one had touched this man in what could have been years. To touch a leper made you ceremonially unclean. No one would risk it. This man had likely lived in a desert of human contact, starved for the simple human connection of touch. And Jesus touched him, willingly, deliberately, without fear, without disgust. And as he touched him, Jesus said, "I am willing, be clean." Immediately, the leprosy left him. The diseased skin cleared. New, healthy flesh replaced the ravaged tissue. He was clean completely, instantly. The incurable condition cured by a word and a touch. Jesus gave him instructions. See that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them. Why tell him not to say anything? Partly because Jesus didn't want his ministry overwhelmed by crowds seeking only physical healing. He had come to preach the kingdom, and miracles were meant to authenticate that message, not become the message itself. But also, Jesus told him to show himself to the priest, to go through the Leviticus 14 rituals. For the first time in Jewish history, those ancient ceremonies would be enacted. The priests would examine him, see that he was truly clean, perform the sacrifices, complete the rituals. And in doing so, they would have to acknowledge that something unprecedented had occurred. A messianic sign had been performed right in their lifetime. by this teacher from Nazareth. But the healed man couldn't contain his joy. He went out and began to talk freely, spread the news, told everyone what Jesus had done. The result was that Jesus could no longer enter a town openly. Crowds thronged him wherever he went. He had to stay in lonely places. But even there, people came to him from everywhere. Perhaps the most poignant story of lepers healed comes from Luke chapter 17. Jesus was traveling along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance as required by law and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." 10 men, bound together by their shared suffering, living as outcasts together, supporting each other through the horror of their condition. They had heard about Jesus, heard the reports of healing, and when they saw him, they seized their chance. Jesus looked at them. He didn't touch them, didn't speak elaborate prayers. He simply said, "Go, show yourselves to the priests." It was an odd command. They were still leprous, still diseased. The priests would only confirm their unclean status and send them away. Why go? But the command implied healing. You only showed yourself to the priest after being cleansed. It required faith to obey, faith to start walking toward the priests while still carrying the disease, faith to act on Jesus' word before seeing any evidence of healing, and as they went, they were cleansed. Not when they arrived at the priest's location, not when Jesus touched them, but as they went, in the act of obedience. While walking in faith, the leprosy left them, all 10 of them, 10 miraculous, impossible healings, 10 outcasts restored, 10 lives given back. Imagine the moment. They're walking together, this band of brothers bound by suffering, heading toward the priest as commanded, and suddenly one of them looks down at his hands. The diseased flesh is gone. Smooth, healthy skin has replaced the ravaged tissue. He stops, looks at his arms, his legs, feels his face. Clean, completely clean. He shouts. The others look. They're all healed, all of them. The joy must have been overwhelming. Years of isolation ending in an instant. Years of pain and shame erased. They could go home. They could embrace their families. They could live again. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, not continuing on to the priests, not rushing home to his family, but returning to Jesus, praising God in a loud voice, running back toward the one who had healed him, throwing himself at Jesus' feet in gratitude and worship, thanking him with what we can imagine were tears of joy streaming down his now clean face. And this man was a Samaritan, an outsider twice over, not just a leper, but a member of the despised Samaritan people. The other 9 were probably Jews, but this Samaritan was the only one who returned. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" 9 healed, 9 lives transformed, 9 families reunited, 9 men who could rejoin society. And not one of them came back to say thank you, but one did. The outsider, the Samaritan, the one who might have been expected to care the least. He understood what had happened. He recognized the giver behind the gift. He couldn't just accept the healing and walk away. He had to return, had to worship, had to express gratitude. Jesus said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." That last phrase could also be translated, "Your faith has saved you." Because this man received more than physical healing. He received salvation. He saw beyond the miracle to the miracle worker. beyond the gift to the giver, beyond his cleaned skin to the one who could cleanse his soul. The healing of lepers demonstrated Jesus' power over the incurable, his willingness to touch the untouchable, his inclusion of the excluded. Every leper healed was a walking, breathing sign that the Messiah had come, that the old order was passing away, that purity and impurity were being redefined, not by ritual washing, but by relationship with him. Jesus didn't fear contamination from touching lepers. His holiness was more powerful than their uncleanness. His purity flowed into them, cleansing them, rather than their impurity flowing into him. It was a preview of what he would do on the cross, taking on himself all the impurity, all the uncleanness, all the sin of humanity, and transforming it, cleansing it, making it new. Power over nature when creation obeys its creator. Jesus' miracles weren't limited to healing human bodies. He also demonstrated authority over nature itself. The wind, the waves, the fish in the sea, the laws of physics, all obeyed his word. Because he was, after all, the one through whom all things were created, the Word made flesh, and creation recognized its creator. One evening, Jesus and his disciples were crossing the Sea of Galilee in a boat. Jesus, exhausted from teaching all day, fell asleep in the stern of the boat, his head on a cushion, breathing deeply, completely at rest, even as the boat rocked on the waves. The Sea of Galilee is deceptive. It sits in a bowl formed by surrounding mountains about 700 feet below sea level, usually calm and beautiful, its surface reflecting the sky like polished glass. But cold air from the mountains can rush down without warning, colliding with warm, moist air rising from the lake's surface. When that happens, violent storms can emerge in minutes. Waves that weren't there suddenly tower. Wind that was gentle becomes a gale. Experienced fishermen knew to respect this lake and its sudden rages, and that's what happened that night. A furious squall came up, waves breaking over the boat, water pouring in, the boat being swamped. These weren't novice sailors. Several of the disciples were professional fishermen. Peter, Andrew, James, and John had spent their lives on this lake. They knew boats, knew water, knew storms. They had weathered rough weather before, and they were terrified. This storm was beyond their experience. They thought they were going to die. Meanwhile, Jesus slept, peaceful, undisturbed, his head on a cushion in the stern, trusting completely in his Father's care. Even in the middle of chaos, even as the boat filled with water, he remained at rest. The disciples woke him. "Teacher," they cried, "don't you care if we drown?" There's almost accusation in that question. Don't you care? We're dying here and you're sleeping? Jesus got up. He rebuked the wind, spoke to the waves. "Quiet, be still." And the wind died down completely. The waves, which naturally would have taken time to settle even after the wind stopped, became perfectly calm. Instantly, not a gradual easing of the storm, but an immediate, supernatural peace. The disciples were terrified, more terrified than they'd been in the storm. "Who is this?" they asked each other. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." They had seen him heal the sick, cast out demons, but this was different. This was nature itself obeying his voice. This was the fundamental forces of wind and water responding to his command as if they were sentient beings who knew their master. In the Old Testament, God was described as the one who commands the storm. Psalm 107 describes how God spoke and stirred up a tempest that lifted high the waves, but also how He stilled the storm to a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed. This was divine power, God's unique authority, and Jesus exercised it with a word. After feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish, which we'll discuss more in a moment, Jesus sent his disciples ahead of him across the lake while he dismissed the crowd. Then he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. It was night. The disciples were out on the lake making their way to the other side. But a strong wind was blowing. The waters grew rough. They had rowed 3 or 4 miles and were struggling. It was somewhere between 3 and 6 in the morning, the darkest part of the night, and they were exhausted. They'd been rowing for hours against the wind and waves. Then they saw him, a figure walking on the lake, coming toward them, walking on the water as if it were solid ground. They were terrified, thought it was a ghost, cried out in fear, but Jesus spoke to them immediately. "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." In the original Greek, "it is I" is ego eimi, which can also be translated "I am," the same phrase God used to identify himself to Moses at the burning bush. I am who I am. It's a divine self-identification. Jesus was saying more than just, "It's me, your teacher." He was claiming divine identity, asserting that he was the great I am walking on the water. In Matthew's account, Peter responded with characteristic impetuousness. "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," Jesus said. Just one word, an invitation, a command, a test of faith. And Peter, impetuous Peter, didn't hesitate. He got out of the boat, swung his legs over the side, put his feet on the water, and started walking. Actually walking on water, defying gravity, defying physics, defying every natural law. His eyes locked on Jesus, his faith holding him up in ways that transcended the physical realm. For a moment, Peter experienced what no other human except Jesus had ever experienced. He walked on water, felt it solid beneath his feet, took step after step toward his master. It was working. Faith was literally supporting him, making the impossible possible. Then Peter looked around, saw the wind whipping the waves, saw the dark water churning beneath him, realized what he was doing, and fear replaced faith. Doubt crept in. Logic reasserted itself, and he began to sink, not slowly, but immediately. The water that had been solid became liquid again. He was going under. "Lord, save me!" he cried out. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" They climbed into the boat together, and when they did, the wind died down. The disciples in the boat worshiped Jesus, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." They understood. This wasn't just a miracle worker. This was God himself in human form, walking on water, controlling the elements, worthy of worship. The feeding of the 5,000 is the only miracle, besides the resurrection, that appears in all 4 Gospels. That tells us something about its significance. This wasn't just a remarkable healing. This was a sign that spoke directly to who Jesus was and what he came to do. Jesus had been teaching a large crowd all day, thousands of people. They had followed him to a remote place, eager to hear his words, hoping to see miracles. The day wore on. Evening approached. The people had been there for hours without food. The disciples came to Jesus. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already getting late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding villages and buy themselves something to eat." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." the disciples were incredulous. Philip calculated quickly. It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Andrew found a boy who had 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. "But how far will that go among so many?" he asked. 5 loaves, 2 fish, and over 5,000 men plus women and children, perhaps 10,000 people or more in total. The inadequacy of the resources was comical. But Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of green grass in that place, Mark tells us, a detail that places this in springtime near Passover, when the hillsides around Galilee turned lush and green. They organized the crowd, groups of 50 or 100, sitting on the green grass in organized rows. Looking from above, it must have looked like a garden of people, arranged in neat sections. Waiting expectantly, thousands of faces turned toward Jesus. Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up to heaven, and gave thanks to his Father, blessed the food, thanked God for his provision, however small it might seem. Then he broke the loaves, started breaking them and giving the pieces to the disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all, and here's where the miracle happened, though the gospel writers don't pause to explain exactly how. As the disciples distributed the food, it multiplied. They'd take bread from Jesus, carry it to a group of 50, hand out pieces to everyone, and their basket would still be full. They'd return to Jesus for more, and there would be more. The supply never ran out. They went through the crowd, thousands of people, 5,000 men plus women and children, meaning perhaps 10 to 15,000 people total. Each person taking as much as they wanted, not a small portion, not a taste, but eating until they were satisfied. Full, bellies filled, hunger satisfied, and still there was more. The miracle wasn't just that the food multiplied, it's that it kept multiplying until everyone was completely satisfied. No one went hungry, no one received less than others. There was enough for everyone, with abundance to spare. When everyone had finished eating, Jesus told his disciples to gather the leftovers. They collected 12 basketfuls, more than they'd started with. An abundance beyond the abundance. Not just enough, but more than enough. A surplus that demonstrated this was no mere natural provision, but a supernatural multiplication. The crowd realized what had happened. They recognized the sign. This was the prophet Moses had promised, the one who would come. Some wanted to make him king by force, but Jesus, knowing their intention, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. At another time during his ministry, likely not long after this, Jesus would feed another crowd. 4,000 this time, 7 loaves and a few small fish. The same divine multiplication occurred. The same abundance remained. 7 basketfuls left over. Twice Jesus demonstrated his ability to provide for the physical needs of thousands with virtually nothing. These feeding miracles pointed back to the Exodus, when God provided manna for Israel in the wilderness, daily bread from heaven, supernatural provision for 40 years. The people ate and were satisfied. God proved himself faithful to sustain them in the barren desert where no food grew. Jesus was the new Moses, the greater deliverer, the one who could provide not just bread from heaven, but who was himself the bread of life. After the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus told the crowds, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." The physical feeding was a sign of spiritual feeding. The bread that filled their stomachs that day would only sustain them temporarily. They would be hungry again by evening. But Jesus offered bread that satisfies eternally. He came to satisfy the deepest hunger of the human soul, the hunger for God, for meaning, for purpose, for life that lasts beyond this fleeting existence, the hunger for forgiveness, for acceptance, for love that never fails. The people wanted to make him king because he gave them bread, but Jesus came to give them something infinitely greater than physical food. He came to give himself, his body broken like bread, his blood poured out like wine, the true bread from heaven that gives life to the world, casting out demons, authority over darkness. The Gospels record numerous instances of Jesus casting out demons, exorcising evil spirits from people who were possessed. These accounts can be uncomfortable for modern readers. We're tempted to explain them away, to suggest these were just mental illnesses that ancient people misunderstood. But the Gospel writers make clear distinctions between illness and demon possession. They record Jesus healing the sick and separately casting out demons. The symptoms were different. The manifestations were different, the methods were different, and Jesus himself treated them as different conditions requiring different responses. When faced with illness, he healed. When faced with demons, he commanded them to leave. Demon possession was a reality in the gospel accounts. Evil spiritual beings taking control of people's bodies and minds, tormenting them, speaking through them, using them, causing physical symptoms that had spiritual origins. And Jesus had absolute authority over these evil spirits. They couldn't resist him. They had to obey. They recognized him immediately as the Son of God and feared him. The most dramatic exorcism took place across the lake from Galilee, in the region of the Gerasenes, a Gentile area, outside Jewish territory. Jesus and his disciples had crossed the lake and landed on the far shore. As soon as they got out of the boat, they encountered a man coming from the tombs to meet them. Matthew's Gospel mentions 2 demon-possessed men in this region, while Mark and Luke focus their account on one particularly tormented individual. This man, whom Mark and Luke describe in detail, was severely demon-possessed, but not by one demon, by many. He was so violent and dangerous that people had tried repeatedly to chain him, hand and foot, heavy chains and iron shackles. But he broke them, every time. With supernatural strength, no one could subdue him. He lived among the tombs, a cemetery, among the dead, and all night and day he would cry out and cut himself with stones, a life of torment, of self-destruction, unable to control his own actions, driven by the evil forces that possessed him. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees before him. But the voice that came out wasn't entirely the man's. "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, in the name of God, don't torture me." The demons recognized Jesus, knew who he was, called him by his divine title. They were terrified because they knew what Jesus could do, knew his authority over them. Jesus had already been commanding the evil spirit to come out. "Come out of this man, you impure spirit," he had said. Jesus asked, "What is your name?" The response came, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Legion, a Roman military term. A legion consisted of about 6,000 soldiers. The name itself would have been terrifying to hear, evoking the brutal occupying force that controlled the region. Whether the number was literal or symbolic of the many demons possessing this man, the point was clear. This wasn't a case of single demon possession. An army of evil spirits had taken residence in him, tormenting him beyond measure. The demons begged Jesus not to send them into the abyss, not to cast them into the bottomless pit. They weren't ready for that final judgment. So they made a request. Nearby was a large herd of pigs feeding on the hillside, about 2,000 pigs. The demons begged, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." Jesus gave them permission. "Go," he said. The evil spirits came out of the man and went into the pigs. The entire herd, 2,000 animals, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and drowned. A spectacular, visible demonstration that the man had been freed. The evil that had inhabited him was gone, transferred to the pigs, and then destroyed in the water. The herdsman ran into town, told everyone what had happened. People came out to see, and when they arrived, they found the man who had been possessed by legion sitting there, dressed, in his right mind, calm, free. The violent, tormented, naked madman who had terrorized the region was now peaceful and whole, and the people were afraid, more afraid of the healed man and the healer than they had been of the demoniac. They pleaded with Jesus to leave their region. They didn't want this kind of power among them. It was too unsettling, too disruptive, even if it meant leaving the man healed. They wanted Jesus gone. As Jesus was getting back into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him, but Jesus didn't let him. "Go home to your own people," Jesus said, "and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away. He traveled throughout the Decapolis, the region of 10 cities, telling everyone what Jesus had done for him. And all the people were amazed, from complete possession to complete freedom, from living among the dead to living among the living, from being controlled by evil to being filled with gratitude and mission. It was a total transformation. The demons couldn't resist Jesus' command. They had to obey. They had to leave, because the Son of God had spoken, and they had no choice but to submit. In other accounts, demons would cry out when Jesus approached, "Have you come to destroy us before the time?" they'd ask. They knew judgment was coming. They knew Jesus had the authority to execute that judgment. They feared him. One time, Jesus cast a demon out of a young boy who would throw himself into fire or water trying to kill himself. The boy's father brought him to the disciples, but they couldn't cast it out. When Jesus arrived, he asked how long the boy had been like this. "From childhood," the father answered. "It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," Jesus said, "everything is possible for one who believes." Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." Jesus rebuked the evil spirit. "You deaf and mute spirit," he said, "I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." The spirit shrieked, convulsed the boy violently, then came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up, healed, free. The torment ended. Even when Jesus' enemies couldn't deny his power to cast out demons, they tried to discredit him by claiming he did it by the power of Beelzebul, the prince of demons. Jesus' response exposed the absurdity of their claim. If Satan drives out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then can his kingdom stand? Evil doesn't cast out evil. Darkness doesn't drive out darkness. Jesus cast out demons by the power of God's Spirit. It was evidence that the kingdom of God had come upon them, that a stronger power than Satan was at work in the world. The strong man was being bound so his house could be plundered. The Gospels tell us that Mary Magdalene had been possessed by 7 demons before Jesus freed her. Though the specific account of her deliverance isn't recorded in detail, the result was undeniable. She was transformed from torment to discipleship, from possession to freedom, from darkness to light. She became one of Jesus' most devoted followers, present at his crucifixion when most of his male disciples had fled. First witness to his resurrection, every exorcism demonstrated Jesus' authority over the spiritual realm, his power over evil, his ability to liberate those held captive by dark forces beyond human control. He came to destroy the works of the devil, to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, to break the chains that bound humanity, both physical and spiritual, raising the dead, life given to the lifeless. If healing the sick demonstrated Jesus' power over disease, and calming storms showed his authority over nature, and casting out demons proved his dominion over evil spirits, then raising the dead revealed something even more profound. Jesus had power over death itself, the ultimate enemy, the final barrier, the one thing that comes for everyone and cannot be escaped. Jesus commanded even death, and death obeyed. The Gospel writers record 3 instances of Jesus raising people from death before his own resurrection, each one unique, each one demonstrating different aspects of his power and compassion. The first occurred as Jesus was traveling to the village of Nain with his disciples and a large crowd. As they approached the town gate, a funeral procession was coming out. A young man had died, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. This detail is significant. In that culture, widows were vulnerable. With no husband to provide for them, they depended on their sons. This woman had lost her husband at some point before this. Now she had lost her only son. She had no one left, no provider, no protector. Her grief was compounded by the reality that she now faced a future of poverty and dependence on the charity of others. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her. He was moved with compassion, deep, genuine emotion for this woman's desperate situation. He saw beyond the funeral procession to the life of suffering that lay ahead for her without her son. He saw her vulnerability, her poverty, her grief, her hopelessness, and he couldn't just walk past, didn't need to be asked, didn't wait for someone to plead with him. He saw her pain, saw her loss, saw her desperate situation, and he acted. "Don't cry," he said gently, words that might sound hollow from anyone else. "What do you mean, don't cry?" "My son is dead." But from Jesus, they carried the weight of coming comfort, of imminent relief, of hope about to be fulfilled. He went up and touched the bier, the platform on which the body was being carried. In that moment, everything stopped. The men carrying it stood still. The mourners fell silent. The processional halted. Everyone stopped, watched, held their breath. What was this teacher doing? You didn't touch death. You maintained distance. You didn't interrupt a funeral procession. You showed respect by staying back. But Jesus stepped forward, touched the bier, brought the procession to a standstill. But Jesus spoke to the dead young man. "Young man, I say to you, get up." And the dead man sat up, began to talk. Life flooded back into his body. Breath returned to lungs that had been still. A heart that had stopped began to beat. Eyes that had been fixed and glassy now moved, focused, saw. He sat up on the bier, started speaking. Jesus gave him back to his mother. The crowd was filled with awe. They praised God. A great prophet has appeared among us, they said. God has come to help his people. And this news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. The widow's son had been dead, but not for long. The funeral procession was still in process. He hadn't been buried yet, but he was definitely dead. And Jesus brought him back, spoke life into death, reversed what seemed irreversible. The second raising involved Jairus, a synagogue leader, a man of some standing in the community, responsible for the order and conduct of Sabbath services. He came to Jesus in desperation. His daughter, his only daughter, was 12 years old, and she was dying. Jairus fell at Jesus' feet, pleaded earnestly with him, begged him. This was a man of standing, a community leader, humbling himself publicly, falling at the feet of this controversial teacher, risking his reputation, risking his position, because his daughter was dying. Nothing else mattered. Not dignity, not reputation, not what the other religious leaders might think. His baby girl was dying. "My little daughter is dying," he said. The tenderness in that phrase, my little daughter, not just my daughter, but my little daughter. His baby, his beloved child. "Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." Jesus went with him immediately, didn't hesitate, didn't tell Jairus to go home and believe. He started walking toward the house, accompanied by his disciples, followed by the crowd that always seemed to press around him wherever he went. Progress was slow through the throng of people, and while they were still on the way, while they were fighting through the crowd, someone came from Jairus' house, a messenger, bringing the terrible, devastating news no parent ever wants to hear. "Your daughter is dead," they said. Matter of fact, blunt, final. Why bother the teacher anymore? It was over. Too late. She was gone. No point in continuing. No point in troubling Jesus further. The window of opportunity had closed. Death had won. But Jesus heard what they said. He turned to Jairus, looked into the eyes of this grieving father whose worst nightmare had just become reality. And he said, "Don't be afraid, just believe." They kept going. When they arrived at the house, there was a commotion. People crying, wailing, professional mourners already at work. The community responding to the death of a child. Jesus said, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him, mocked him. Everyone knew she was dead. What was this teacher talking about? But Jesus put everyone out except the child's father and mother and the 3 disciples who were with him, Peter, James, and John. He went into the room where the child was lying. He took her by the hand. In Aramaic, the language of the home, the language the child would have heard from infancy, Jesus said gently, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately, the girl stood up, began to walk around. She was 12 years old, dead moments before, now alive, restored, walking. The people who had been mourning were completely astonished. Jesus gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this. Perhaps he wanted to prevent the kind of overwhelming crowds that would make his ministry difficult, or perhaps he wanted to protect the family from being besieged by curious onlookers. He was also practical, he told them to give her something to eat, because she'd need nourishment after what she'd been through. The girl had been dead. The text doesn't tell us exactly how long, though it was at least long enough for the house to be filled with mourners and for the professional wailers to have arrived and begun their work. Long enough for people to be certain she was gone. But Jesus spoke, and life returned. As simple as waking someone from sleep, though far more miraculous. Death had to release its grip at his command. The third raising was the most dramatic, most public, most documented. The raising of Lazarus. Lazarus lived in Bethany, a village less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. He and his 2 sisters, Mary and Martha, were close friends of Jesus. When Lazarus became sick, the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." Jesus' response was unexpected. He said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." But then he stayed where he was for 2 more days. He didn't rush to Bethany, didn't try to heal Lazarus before he died. He waited, deliberately. He later explained to his disciples that this was intentional, saying he was glad he wasn't there when Lazarus died, so that they might believe he had a purpose beyond healing. He was going to demonstrate something far greater. Finally, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's go back to Judea." The disciples protested. People in Judea had just tried to stone Jesus. It wasn't safe to go back. But Jesus insisted. He told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." When Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. 4 days. In that climate, decomposition would have begun. There was no question he was dead, no possibility of a coma or some other explanation. He had been dead and buried for days. Martha came out to meet Jesus. "Lord," she said, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha thought he meant the resurrection at the last day, the future hope all Jews believed in. "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day," she said. Jesus made one of his most profound statements. "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" Martha answered, "Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." Then Mary came. She fell at Jesus' feet, said the same thing Martha had said. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Some translations say he groaned in his spirit. He was experiencing the full weight of human grief, feeling the pain of death, the sorrow of loss, the brokenness of this fallen world where death reigns. "Where have you laid him?" Jesus asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. They began walking toward the tomb, and as they walked, surrounded by mourners, seeing the grief of Mary and Martha and all who loved Lazarus, Jesus was overcome with emotion. Then Jesus wept. 2 words, the shortest verse in many English Bibles, but 2 words that carry immense theological weight. Jesus wept. He knew he was about to raise Lazarus, knew the grief was temporary, knew joy was minutes away, knew the ending of this story. But in that moment, he entered fully into human sorrow. He wept with those who weep, felt what they felt, mourned with them. The tears running down his face were real. The emotion was genuine. God in human flesh experiencing the full weight of human grief. This reveals something profound about the character of God. He is not distant or unmoved by our suffering. He doesn't watch our pain with cold detachment. He enters into it, feels it, weeps with us. The God who would raise the dead first wept for the dead. The God who had power over death first felt the pain death causes. Some in the crowd said, "See how he loved him." Others said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance, typical of burial sites in that region. "Take away the stone," Jesus said. Martha protested, "But Lord, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Jesus reminded her, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" They took away the stone. Jesus looked up and prayed, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." Then he called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen, face covered with a cloth, walking out of the tomb alive after 4 days of death. "Take off the grave clothes and let him go," Jesus said. Many of the Jews who had seen what Jesus did believed in him, but some went to the Pharisees and told them what had happened. The religious leaders were not pleased. This miracle was too public, too undeniable, too powerful. It threatened their authority, their position, their control. From that day on, they plotted to kill Jesus, and they even considered killing Lazarus too, because on account of him, many Jews were believing in Jesus. The evidence was too strong. A man dead for 4 days, now alive, walking, talking, eating, fully restored. It couldn't be explained away, couldn't be dismissed. The raising of Lazarus was the climax of Jesus' miraculous signs, the ultimate demonstration of his power, victory over death. Not just healing the dying before they died, not just interrupting death moments after it occurred, but calling someone back after days in the tomb, after decomposition had begun, after all hope was lost. "I am the resurrection and the life," Jesus had said. He wasn't just someone who could perform resurrections. He was the resurrection itself. Life embodied, the source of life, the one who has power over death because he is life. These 3 raisings foreshadowed what was to come. Jesus himself would die, would be buried, would lie in a tomb, but on the 3rd day he would rise, not brought back by someone else's power, but rising by his own power, conquering death from the inside, breaking its hold forever, and because he rose, all who believe in him will also rise. The widow's son, Jairus' daughter, and Lazarus were all raised back to physical life. They would eventually die again. Their resurrections were temporary, though miraculous. But Jesus' resurrection would be different. He would rise to eternal life, a glorified body that would never die again. And that's the resurrection he promises to all his followers. Not just life restored, but life transformed, life that lasts forever. Conclusion: the miracles of Jesus were more than acts of power. They were acts of love, demonstrations of compassion, signs pointing to his identity as the Messiah, the Son of God, the one promised by the prophets. Each miracle was a window into the heart of God. Each one revealed something about who Jesus was and why he came. Water became wine, showing he came to bring joy and transformation, to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary, to bring abundance where there was lack, to inaugurate a new covenant of grace that would replace the old covenant of ritual. The sick were healed, revealing his compassion for suffering humanity, his unwillingness to walk past pain, his power to restore broken bodies, and his authority to forgive sins. The blind received sight, proving he is the light of the world, the one who can illuminate darkness, both physical and spiritual, the one who opens eyes to see not just the physical world, but spiritual reality. Lepers were cleansed, demonstrating his power over the incurable and his willingness to touch the untouchable, his ability to break through social barriers, his refusal to be bound by human rules about clean and unclean. Storms were calmed and bread was multiplied, showing his authority over nature and his ability to provide, his power over creation because he is the creator, his abundance in the face of human scarcity. Demons were cast out, proving his dominion over evil, his authority over the spiritual realm, his power to liberate those held captive by forces beyond human control. The dead were raised, revealing his power over death itself, his identity as the resurrection and the life, his ability to call life out of death, hope out of despair, future out of endings. Each miracle pointed beyond itself. Each one invited people to believe, to trust, to follow, not just to receive physical healing or provision, but to receive him, to enter into relationship with the one who made all things and came to redeem all things. The miracles were never ends in themselves. They were always signs pointing to something greater, pointing to Jesus himself, to who he was, to what he came to do, to the kingdom he was establishing. The religious leaders of Jesus' day often missed the point of the miracles. They focused on whether he was breaking Sabbath laws or whether he had the proper authority. They debated the mechanics while missing the meaning. They argued about the methods while ignoring the message. But the common people, the ordinary folks who experienced these miracles or witnessed them, often understood better. They saw the compassion. They recognized the power. They sensed that God was among them in a unique and powerful way. The miracles continue to speak today. They remind us that Jesus cares about our physical needs and our spiritual needs, that he has power over everything that afflicts us, that no situation is too desperate for him, that he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. The same power that calmed the storm can calm our anxious hearts. The same compassion that moved him to heal the sick moves him toward us in our brokenness. The same authority that raised the dead can bring new life to everything in us that feels dead or dying. These stories aren't just ancient history, they're testimonies that speak into our present reality. When we face storms in our lives, whether literal or metaphorical, we can remember that Jesus has authority over wind and waves. When we feel paralyzed by fear or circumstance, we can remember the paralytic who walked at Jesus' command. When we've been marginalized or made to feel unclean by society, we can remember how Jesus touched lepers. When we feel possessed by forces beyond our control, addictions or compulsions or destructive patterns, we can remember that Jesus casts out demons. When we face situations that seem dead, relationships that appear beyond repair, dreams that look finished, we can remember that Jesus raises the dead. The miracles authenticate Jesus' identity. They prove he wasn't just a wise teacher or a good moral example. He was and is the Son of God, God incarnate, the Word made flesh. And because of who he is, we can trust what he says. We can believe his promises. We can stake our lives and our eternities on his claims. The miracles give us confidence that when Jesus says he is the way, the truth, and the life, he's telling the truth. When he says he came to give life abundant, he means it and has the power to deliver it. These are not just ancient stories. They are testimonies to the character and power of the one we serve, the one who loves us, the one who came not just to demonstrate power, but to use that power to save, to heal, to restore, to give life. And if you've enjoyed this journey through the miracles of Jesus, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share these peaceful, biblical explorations with others who might benefit, and let me know in the comments which miracle means the most to you and why. May the peace that Jesus spoke over the storm rest upon you tonight. May the light he gave to blind eyes illuminate your path. May the life he breathed into the dead bring new life to your weary soul. Rest well, knowing that the same Jesus who performed these miracles walks with you still. Good night.